Hey guys, it's Mike Mangialardi here, the creator of Coding Artists, and I'm really excited today to be presenting you with another tutorial. Now this is going to be of a lot of assistance if you already have work with pure CSS images. Particularly, I'm going to be discussing how you can add some CSS animations, and then after that we'll get into some detail about how we can use Vue.js to sprinkle on some dynamic CSS animations. So if you're not familiar with pure CSS images already, I highly recommend that you check out the beginner's guide to pure CSS images, which I've linked in the description. However, that's not really a prerequisite for this tutorial per se, as we're just going to be discussing how to handle CSS animations. All right, with all that aside, let's go ahead and get started with adding some animations to our cute little koala. So the first thing that we'll need to do is we'll have to have an animation statement. And we put this animation statement in one of our classes. So let's start with our ear right. Right here in the bottom, we're going to put an animation statement. So to start an animation statement, you put animation : like that. Now for a basic example, there's going to be three main things that we have to specify. First, it's going to be the name of our animation, which we'll define later. For now, let's just call it spin me, like so. And then the next thing we want to put in is the duration. So how long will it take for this animation to complete? So in our example, we'll just do 3 seconds. And now the last thing that we're going to specify is how many iterations do we want to occur for our animation. So iterations being, for instance, maybe we just want, when we run spin me, to spin our ear right, we just want to spin it once. Now we can specify if we want to spin it once, spin it twice, or maybe you want it to continually spin over and over. So basically, iterations is synonymous with thinking about how many times you want your animation to cycle. So in our case, let's just go ahead and say infinite. So it's going to continue to repeat this animation over and over and over. All right, so let's do this with both ears. So we can just copy this same animation and we'll paste it in our ear left as well. Now I could go to the bottom of my CSS and I'm going to start putting in the CSS animations. First, I'm going to change the processor to SCSS, and that will allow me to make some easy comments like this. All right, so here I'm going to just note that we're going to be adding our CSS animations. So we had a animation of spin me. So to define that, we'll do at keyframes spin me, like that. And so what we'll have in here is just different percentages. So this first example is going to be pretty simple. So here we have two percentages. We have a percentage of 0% and a percentage of 100%. Now what these percentages are referring to is the specific point in our animation. So let's say, for example, our animation, like we had it, is 3 seconds. So what we want to do, so at 0%, we're 0 seconds into the animation, and at 100%, we're 100% the animation, or we're in 3 seconds. So if we had something like 50% as well, and our animation is 3 seconds, 0% is 0 seconds in, 50% is 1.5 seconds in, so half of 3, and then at 100%, we're 3 seconds in, and depending upon what duration we put in our animation statement, obviously the times are going to change, but we always refer to the specific points using these percentages. Now what we can do is in these percentages put in some CSS value. So we can change CSS values over time in an animation. So at 0%, we're going to have one CSS value. And then at 100%, we're going to change it to something else. So for this example, for our spin me, let's go ahead and do transform, rotate, and start off at 0 degrees. So when we start off, we're not going to have rotate our ears at all. However, when we get to 100%, we want to have a full 360-degree spin. So if you take a look at the ears, they are moving in a circular fashion, and they could almost look as if they're wiggling. So that looks good, and that means that our animation is working correctly. Now, with these ears being this color, it's kind of hard to see an animation going on. So why don't we add another CSS value in here that's going to change the color. Now, I'm not going to do this, but if you were, adding something like now you're doing transform and changing color, you're obviously going to want to rename this as something else. But this is just going to show how you can handle multiple CSS values being changed in your one animation. I also want to be clear that spin me is not something that's predefined. So I could name this, Homer Simpson, and if I had Homer Simpson in my animation statement, then the animation would work. So this name doesn't affect anything. Anyways, let's go ahead and change the background color of our koala's ears. So when we start off, we're going to have a background that is going to be this hexadecimal code. So let me copy that. And so that's the color we want starting off. Now when we end, let's change it to more of a dark gray color. So now, as you can see, we have our ears pulsing to be changing colors. So at the start of our animation, we have that normal light gray background color we defined here. And then by the end, we're going to have our final dark gray color. So as you can see, when it starts, it kind of goes through a phase where it gets darker and darker until it reaches our final background that we specified. Alright guys, before we move forward, I want to discuss this graphic that I have in front of me, and hopefully it makes more sense to understand what we just wrote in our code. So we had a CSS value being changed during our animation. We had a start of a light gray color, and we had the end of a dark gray color. And there was a certain duration that we specified that would mean how long this animation would take to apply. And that duration for us was 3 seconds. So from our start of 0 seconds and to our end of 3 seconds, we were going from, again, a light gray to dark gray. But as you can see in this graphic, there is a bunch of intermediate values that are going to be represented as we go forward and complete our animation. So this can be really pictured well with our example of a light gray color to a dark gray color, because if you look at it again, it's not just going from one color to another color. There's a bunch of intermediate colors that you can see very quickly come and go. Now, what I also want to describe is, let's look at our example of our spin animation. So in that spin animation, we specified that, hey, we're going to start at 0 degrees, so there's going to be no rotation. But by the end, we're going to get to 360 degrees. However, if you look at the animation, it's doing a full spin continuously. And the reason it's doing that is because it's not just going from 0 to 360 degrees, from point A to point B, but there's all these intermediate degrees which it's rotating in a complete 360 degree circle. So hopefully that kind of explains how our example worked. Now, like I mentioned, in our CSS animations, we could specify, okay, at 33%, we want this specific value, or at 66%, we want this specific value. So we can go to the points throughout our entire animation and specify what CSS values we want to have. Now, if we look at just a simple example like we had, just one start of, in our case, one color, and by the end another color, we can really see how these intermediate values work. Alright, so that is CSS animations on a very basic level. And so this is a very simple way that you can start incorporating them. And now I'll leave it up to you to start to get creative and think about how can I add animations that are adding something of importance to your image. Now, just because you know CSS animations doesn't mean you should just throw them all over the place. When you're making pure CSS images, think of a way that you can use these animations to do something that is adding something valuable or memorable to your image. So let's go ahead, and now that we've learned the basics of a CSS animation, I'm going to show you guys how you can sprinkle on some Vue.js to make this a bit more dynamic. And now that might sound a bit intimidating, but I hope as we go through, I'll show you that it really isn't as complex as it sounds. So let's go ahead and get started by first going to the settings of our project and adding in Vue.js. So under JavaScript, we could go to Quick Add and we can select Vue, which is going to be cut off. And you select Vue and hit save and close. And now we're ready to start writing some Vue.js. I'm also going to get rid of this animation for now, and we'll write another one later. So I'll go into our ears and get rid of these animation statements. So what we're going to do is we have to specify a new Vue.js instance, which we can do by doing var app new Vue, and then we'll have three things that we'll want. We'll have an L, and we'll do hashtag app. We'll have data, and we'll have methods. So once we've created this Vue instance, we need to associate it with our HTML. So we'll use this L to communicate to our HTML where the connection is. So we're going to make the connection with this Vue instance where there's an ID of app in our HTML. Currently we don't have that, so let's add it. So we're going to wrap our entire pure CSS image in a div with the ID of app. And because here we specified this ID of app in our L, we're going to make the connection between this Vue instance and all of our pure CSS image. So next, now that we've made a connection and made an empty shell of a Vue instance, what can we do with this? So what we're going to be able to do in our project is we're going to dynamically control our classes using Vue.js. So in our example, what we're going to do is we're going to have two classes that we're going to write in our CSS. One, we're going to have our earWrite class, which you already have, and we can leave it as is. And this is going to be a static class, meaning there's not going to be any animation going on in this class. Then we're going to write a second class called earWrite active. And earWrite active is going to have some sort of animation being applied to it. And what I'll show you how to do is how we can use Vue.js to control which class is currently activated. And because we have one class without animation and one class with animation, we'll be able to cause animations to occur using Vue.js. Now don't get too confused. We're going to go through this and hopefully it makes a lot of sense. So first things first, we're going to make some data called ear class. And we're going to set that equal to ear write. Like so. And now we need to make the connection with our HTML saying, hey, instead of just having one class, we're going to be controlling our class of Vue.js. So to make that connection, we do v bind class, meaning we're going to bind the class, or in other words, we're going to control the class of Vue.js. So we'll set it equal to our data, which is ear class. So because we gave vbind class a value of ear class, we're saying, hey, we're going to control this class of Vue.js. Let's see what class is currently active by looking up ear class. We look at ear class and we see that the CSS class that we're specifying is earWrite. So what we wrote up here is really synonymous if we did div class equal to ear right. However, by doing it this way, we can change the value of our ear class from ear right to ear right active, which will have some CSS animation, which will allow us to do some pretty cool things. So let's go ahead and write our ear right active class. So we could just copy and paste ear right, and we're just going to add a dash active. Now, as I mentioned, the only thing that's going to be changed is we're going to be adding some sort of animation. So let's do animation and call it drag right. And we're going to specify a duration of 3 seconds. And let's just say we want this to have 2 iterations. Okay, so now that we've written drag right as our animation and given it its duration and iterations, let's go ahead and write this drag right animation. So again, we do add keyframes, drag right, and then again, we're going to keep it simple with a 0% and 100%. And so what I mean by drag right is what we're going to do is right now, if we looked at the CSS for our ear right, we're controlling where our ear is using percentage. And right now it has a percentage of right -20% to start. So we want it to end right there. However, we want to drag from the right of the screen. So we want it to be coming from further out from the screen and being dragged into place. So we're going to specify a right of 80%. So again, we have an animation, we put at keyframes, we put the animation that we specified in our animation statement, which was drag right. And at 0% of the animation, so 0 seconds in, we're going to start with our ear right being positioned all the way out by -80%. And then once it reaches 100%, after 3 seconds, it's going to go back to where it is now. So that's going to be the animation that we're going to apply to our ear right. Now, to just test this out and make sure this is working, we're going to manually change this ear class, which again is controlling what class is active on our ear right. And we're going to change it to ear right active. And now we can see the animation being applied, and it should run twice like we specified. So that's working. However, we need a way so we can change this from ear right to ear right active on a user's input instead of on us manually typing it in the data. So we'll have to add an event handler, and then we'll have to have a function that's going to be called to handle that event. So in our methods, we'll specify a function that's going to be called drag ear right. And that's how we would define this function. So in here, we just need to change ear class from ear right to ear right active. So how do we do that? Well, we have some data that's in our Vue instance. So we access it by putting this dot and then whatever the data we want to access, which in this case is ear class. And then we're just going to assign it ear right active. So when this function drag ear right is called, it's going to change our ear class from ear right to ear right active so the animation can occur like we just saw a little bit ago. So how we're going to cause this function to be triggered? So we can do that by adding an event handler. So we do v on. So v on is saying v on this event, we're going to call some function. So v on click, we are going to call drag ear right. So this div is controlling our ear right. So when we click on this ear right, we should trigger our drag ear right function, which should change the class to ear right active, which should then apply the CSS animation. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. So I click on the ear, and now you can see it's changed from a class of ear right to a class of ear right active, and then the animation applied and ran twice. So guys, that's all I wanted to cover in this video. Hopefully it was helpful for you guys to see how you can create a basic CSS animation, and hopefully it wasn't too complex to kind of wrap your mind around how you can sprinkle on some Vue.js to be able to control CSS classes and, as a result, CSS animations dynamically. And to make sure, if you haven't already, to join the Daily CSS Images Challenge. Each weekday for 50 days, you'll be given a CSS drawing prompt, and you can create cool things like this koala. So if you're interested in that, that's also linked into the description. And once again, thanks guys, and see you next time.